And we're back like we never left. Oregon fans, what's going on? How we living? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast, your premier Oregon podcast covering all things recruiting and Oregon football. It is Tuesday, August 22nd, 2023, and we are another day closer to the start of the 2023 college football season. I'm not rolling solo on today's episode. I am joined by Tyson Alger of the I-5 corridor, also previously covered the Ducks for the Oregonian and the Athletic. Tyson, how we doing? Thanks for being here.
Dude, it's hearing you actually say we're getting close to kickoff it's just a relief, because like this off season and then like the last like 2 months has just been so much auxiliary things that I'm feeling pretty good knowing that we're about a week away from getting into game week here.
Yeah, we're getting close. The anticipation just continues to build with each day. So got some great topics to hop into here with you on a little Oregon football chat and on a Tuesday morning. We said it a little bit before we went live here, but we talked a little bit every now and then when I was in Eugene. But honestly, just definitely admired your work from afar before I got into the space, and then to see you take your career with the I-5 corridor and do your thing there. Like just really great to see you, continue to have that success, because you do a heck of a job.
Oh, shoot. Well, I really appreciate that, man. Like that was kind of the worry when I left the Athletic, was like, I hope people liked my stuff enough to try to find me wherever I end up. And, tomorrow actually marks the 2-year anniversary of the I-5 corridor, and the lights are still on, like the power is still working. This thing's hooked up to a generator, so it'll never go out. But it's, the one thing that I'm an Oregon transplant. I grew up in Alaska. I've been in Portland here for the last 10 years and have covered the Ducks for pretty much that entire period. And the one thing that I'm incredibly thankful of is the Oregon readership and audience is one that, I think it took a couple of years of me mispronouncing things before they really like warmed up to it. But like it's an audience that I think really appreciates the writers and the reporters and just the stories that are able to be kind of told about the Oregon Ducks, because this is a university that has had quite the story over the last 20, 30, 40 years. And I'm fortunate enough that I've been able to have a platform to be able to tell a little part of that.
Yeah, well, we're gonna get into some of that today. But before we get too far into the show, we're coming to you guys live at a couple different spots. We're here on YouTube at Oregon Football Max Torres. If you guys are here in the live chat, go ahead and leave me a comment. Let me know how you're feeling about the Ducks heading into 23, and maybe throw a comment our way, and we can see if Tyson and I can answer it. And then we're also on Twitter at mtorresports and the Ducks Digest Facebook page. But with all the formalities out of the way, I'm going to start with a pretty big question, but I think it can take us a lot of interesting places. So, Tyson, we talked about how you've covered Oregon for quite a while now. I wanted to start this off with asking you, how have you kind of seen the program change under Dan Lanning compared to some of those recent years? Because we're heading into a very interesting era of college football with conference realignment, with expansion, all that stuff with the playoff and everything. So just kind of wanted to dig into things there.
Yeah, I think a lot of the Lanning era has been kind of the natural extension of what Mario Cristobal started at Oregon, because that was the big transformation for Oregon. It was taking a school that, and don't get me wrong, like the national championship teams had great players for the Ducks. I mean, Marcus Mariota, you can go down the list, but those were teams that kind of succeeded on finding like the fringe things to be successful at, like whether it be up-tempo offense or recruiting guys with jerseys or just being like that national brand. It seemed like Eugene was kind of like this quirky outpost that you had to like really try to find the right guys for the system to win. And they were incredibly successful at doing that. But since Cristobal came in, it was hey, we need to invest heavily in our recruiting, talent acquisition, and really kind of build this team up like the top echelons of teams in college football are. I think that's the biggest thing you've seen over the last 10, 15 years is those teams that were getting the top level talent are just getting even more top level talent. I think it's really concentrating at the top. And for Oregon to be a school that has really kind of prided itself the last 20 years on being amongst that best in college football. I think the talent acquisition has become the most important part. And so with Lanning coming in and coming from a Georgia where he knows exactly what you need on a roster to win and knows what you need to do in the offseason to win, I think this has really just kind of continued that like college football is a 24/7 all year long type of thing. And I think it's just the Dan Lanning era has been the professionalism of Oregon Ducks football. And I don't mean that in a way of saying that like, yeah, no, I mean, like, that's what it is. I mean, that's what going to the Big Ten is about. It's about getting into that type of money, and it's attracting those type of players. And I think Lanning is the right type of coach, especially with his age and just kind of having a grasp on like there's a lot of older coaches that hold him in pretty high regard for the way that he respects the game and he goes about things, but like he's very nimble. And I just think that Oregon is in a nice position to kind of take this next leap forward where they're going to be playing against teams that are routinely as talented as they are. Because that's the one thing in the Pac-12 is for the last 10 years, it's really only been USC that's matched them talent-wise. And that's not going to be the case when you're playing Ohio State and Michigan State every season.
Yeah, I mean, the talent acquisition part that you mentioned is certainly something that I'm interested in. Being someone that covers recruiting as heavily as I do, so they're continuing to stay at that upper tier of the game, and I think this is a really remarkable just time for Dan Lanning because it's his second year as a head coach, second year with the Ducks. But look at all the change that's happening around him as this is going on, as he's still kind of getting his feet underneath him a little bit. I think it's going to be so much more than just it's a good basis for a good foundation that he is building off of where Mario Cristobal kind of took the program, certainly from an SEC blueprint, a championship blueprint, and all that. But now it's going to be interesting to see what does Dan Lanning do to make it his team. To make a mark on this is the Dan Lanning era of Oregon football, because a 10-win season is a good start, but I think that there's definitely more things that this team is capable of.
And that's one thing I find so fascinating about the Lanning era so far is like, again, they were a good football team last year. They're expected to be a good football team this year, but outside of like Bo Nix, it's really hard to kind of put your finger on like, what is the identity of this team? And that's such a stark contrast from the Cristobal era where it was Cristobal would come out and tell you every single day, like our identity is tough football. It starts on the lines. It's, we're creating the best offensive lines you've ever seen around here. And we're going to play power football. And with Lanning's, it's just still like, all right, like, let's see the way that this roster shapes up, the identity of this roster shapes up. I know Dion has gotten so much, guff out in Colorado for the amount of roster turnover that he's had since he's been there, but Oregon's quite up there as well too over the kind of the year and 6 months that Lanning's been head coach. So I think I understand why there might be a lot of pressure on him going into this year, because like, as you said, there's so much going around, like being the head, like there's no way he's been able to just focus on football as the conference stuff is changing. I still can't believe how early these guys have to start recruiting everyone too. Like I'm an old head in that sort of part of this world. And it's just the amount of tabs that they probably have to have open in their Chrome browser at all times during the day is insane. And so when, Saturday after the scrimmage, when it kind of seemed like Lanning was a little bit testy from the start, when people are asking him about like just basic things about how the team looked, he looked like he was a little stressed that day. And I completely understand. I had a couple people text me like, that's what happens when you have a good team and you want to be better. I had someone else text me that said like, that's what happens when you don't have a good team. Again, with this Oregon team, it's really hard to read between the lines. And I think that's kind of how they want it to be.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of good stuff there that we can get into, Tyson. Let's stay on Lanning for just a second, because I'd be interested to pick your brain here as a fellow reporter. I think one thing that is interesting to pick up on as you go to these press conferences, I did that during the very start of Lanning's tenure, and then now I'm doing it from afar. But you kind of pick up on those little idiosyncrasies and kind of some of their habits. Like, you can see when Lanning might be a little bit uncomfortable, his ears kind of pin back. And then now he's kind of answering some of these questions just with flat out, I'm not telling you that. Yeah. And I think he's a perfect example as far as from the jump, you see why in like the J School and Journalism 101, interviewing, you don't ask close-ended questions like yes or no, because Dan Lanning will tell you yes or no.
It's I find it to be a welcomed challenge, and that's not to say I like that he doesn't give any answers to anything. I also think reporters aren't going to win any battles in the public view of things when we're complaining about access or a coach not giving us answers. Like you're always just going to get like, I don't care what he says to you guys as long as they're winning football. But yeah, like it's a challenge to go down to a press conference and like you really have to think about what you want to ask and what you want to get out of them. And I think that there are, and this isn't meant to criticize anyone because this is a tough job, and it's even tougher when you have a coach that doesn't really help you in those sense. But you can't come in with yes or no questions. You can't come in with like who stood out today, which is really tough too because they won't let you see who stood out today. But it's people have been kind of comparing that to like the Chip Kelly era where Chip was notoriously tough with reporters. And I think he's gotten a little softer over the years, but Chip was always someone that seemed like he would rewarded well thought out questions that weren't just kind of to get the day's content sort of thing, or to try to get like a headline on who's injured or who might not have practiced today or that sort of thing. So it's definitely a game you have to play. And I'm not playing the game a lot. Like I live up here in Portland. I'm enjoying my semi-retirement as a beat writer up here, but I have a lot of respect for those guys that have to go down and they have to do their job. Like you always hear coaches say that, like, I respect you guys for having to do your job and I appreciate it. But sometimes it doesn't always feel that way.
Yeah. Sorry. I was messing with my audio a little bit while you were answering that because my microphone's been pretty finicky.
Oh, it was a great answer. I mean, the numbers shot up in the chat.
Like, no, I liked it. I still caught some of the parts of that. But sorry, I just wanted to let you know I was trying to work on that behind the scenes. But yeah, what you were saying is definitely something that resonates, right? It's a tough job, especially you just got to work with what you have.
Hey, sorry, Max. I can't seem to hear you. There you go.
Sorry about that. My microphone keeps bouncing back and forth between my actual mic and my laptop. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I've had that happen a million times. It's the most frustrating thing in the world.
I'm losing my mind slowly but surely. Where can I pick up on that answer? Just as far as I was saying that there's a lot of pressure as a coach at Oregon, regardless of where you fall in the hierarchy, just given the investment that they have in the program from like a Phil Knight level to even your average fan in Eugene. It is a college town. So I think that there's definitely high expectations for Dan Lanning. And I wanted to, before I get too far, I wanted to go back to one of the points we were talking about as far as how how Lanning leaves his mark on this team. And I think it's going to be a great defense eventually. Clearly they weren't there last year, but I think he's already kind of making his mark on this team just by the talent acquisition and the roster overhaul that we saw this offseason. Because like you said, it's up there with Colorado just from a pure numbers standpoint. Granted, they've gone about it in two very different ways, and Prime has been a lot more outspoken about it.
Yeah. Trying to name all the new dudes in Oregon secondary is going to take me probably until maybe week 6 or 7. But yeah, that's a good point. Like that there's actually like a visual transformation in the defense too. Just like looking at like the type of linebackers that they've like brought in this year. Like I think Dan Lanning's defense wants to get away from kind of like the stiff, bulky, like 265-pound type of Noah Sewell linebackers. And while Sewell was good for 2 years here, I just didn't think that was a fit last season. So like this was a coach that when he was hired from Georgia, the one thing everyone talked about was how good Georgia's defense was. He was Georgia's defensive coordinator in the national championship game. I have to imagine it frustrated him last year to see certain performances that his defense put out there. And so I don't know if they're going to be able to fix that entirely in all one season, but yeah, I would imagine the long-term stamp there is going to be putting together one of the conference's better defenses.
Yeah, and Oregon's had good defenses in the past, but I don't think they've ever had this much talent on one side of the ball, is just specifically defense, and that's why it makes the story all that more interesting. While when you look at Bo Nix being the story last year, because they were dominant on offense, but a lackluster defense kind of meant that they were skating by in some games that they really should have handled. And then you had the Oregon State game and the way that it did. So if this defense can this defense catch up with the offense, I think is really one of the biggest storylines that we have to monitor going into next season. Because even though Will Stein comes in as the new OC, you still have a returning quarterback. The first time Oregon's had that really since Herbert, like a quality quarterback. So even though you have some new pieces there, I think the story is really going to be, can that defense catch up to the offense, which is, it's going to be interesting. I wonder how long that's going to take.
It was funny because I was going back and reading a few gamers from last year and just trying to kind of remember how the flow of the season went. And I think how the year ended kind of made people forget that there were times last year where Oregon looked as good offensively as they've looked since 2013, 14, maybe even 2012. Like the UCLA home win, where it was a top 25 win, game day in town, sold out, Autzen Stadium. I think Nix had as many touchdowns as he had incompletions in that game. Like that was the game where it was like, holy cow, like Oregon might be all the way back. And like, we're talking back to like 2010 type of hype. And then it kind of petered off towards the end of the year, especially on the defensive side. So I think, and also part of that happened, Bo Nix's injury played a part into that too. But if that offense can be even just equal to what it was last year, I mean, even if it's like 5% worse than it was last season, if they have a defense that is even marginally better, like this is going to be a very formidable Oregon team, because the amount of weapons Nix has at his disposal is kind of gross, to be honest. Like I've been covering this team for a long time, and just I've never been able to look at like the receivers and running backs and be like, there's this many dudes on this route. Like it's just packed in there.
Yeah, the talent on the offensive side of the ball is insane. Like I think this might be this is easily going to be the deepest receiver core that they've had since I started covering them, but I haven't been on the beat as long as you have. So that just speaks to the talent that they have in that room. I think tight end is kind of an interesting question mark, given the injuries and the movement that you saw in the portal there. But as long as you have Terrence Ferguson, and if Patrick Herbert can take that step, and then you get a little bit out of one of these transfers and maybe Kenyon Sadiq, I think we'll be in good shape.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the one, depending on Terrence's health, if he's good to go. Like I like the connection that him and Nix had last year. Is this Patrick Herbert watch season? Like, I don't know. We'll find out. It does seem like there are like still like a handful of like pretty highly recruited Cristobal leftovers who were still kind of waiting to pop. And, it's either Herbert at tight end or just some of the guys in the secondary on defense, where it's like Triquez or Steve Stevens or,
Dante Manning.
God, Brian Addison makes me feel super old, because that was Cristobal's, I believe, first Pac-12 media day, where they had gotten him to flip like right before camp started. And it was kind of he was a receiver then, and they was talking about just the pure athleticism the guy had. And he was decent last year, back at top at safety. But I just feel like there's still a little bit of untapped potential among some of the holdovers that aren't necessarily the new imports. Yeah.
So I feel like every time we talk, you answer like there's something that I was thinking about, and then it's like, oh wait, what if we go this way? But yeah, Brian Addison in that secondary is someone who I think can definitely emerge as a major, asset. But with the overhaul and the pieces that they brought in, whether it be Tysheem Johnson or Evan Williams in that secondary, I think you're going to see a lot of competition there, and it's really, for lack of a better phrase, put up or shut up season. For at least for that safety group, because you have a whole bunch of guys that have played a lot of football, but it's just kind of been okay or good, certainly not at the level that Oregon's needed it to be at.
Dude, I mean, like you can even go to cornerback, look at Dante Manning. Like he was the other 5-star along with the Justin Flo, Noah Sewell 5-star signings of that class. And there was so much kind of hype and potential there. And I think we unfairly grade football development these days, where if you're not shining out as like a freshman or a sophomore, it's like this kid's a bust. And I think people kind of throw development out the window. But, that I was talking to Dante quite a bit at Media Day, and I was just like, what's it like to still be here when so many of the people that you came in with, especially that class, are either gone or some people have gone on to the NFL? And he was just like, yeah, like it's weird. It's different. It's like, and I think a lot of those players kind of know that this is that quote unquote put up or shut up time, because as Lanning's shown, like he's going to bring in guys to replace you if you cannot play at that level.
Yeah, let's shift it up a little bit, and then we'll maybe get to some of these questions because I saw some in the comments. But let's talk about kind of what defines success for Oregon in 2023. Ooh. Because you could go a couple different ways here, and Oregon has been knocking at the door of trying to get back to a New Year's Six bowl or really get back to the playoff for quite some time. And Dan Lanning comes in and rips off a 10-win season right off the bat. What defines success in your eyes, Tyson?
I think they need to go to the Pac-12 title game. I think that's really important to just, especially with the eyeballs that are going to be on this year's Pac-12 title game. Like this is the last of the best of the conference, and it would be a pretty weird look if it was like Cal and Colorado in the title game, and I'm sure the Big Ten would love bringing in USC and UCLA and Oregon and Washington if they're not kind of the featured players in that. So I think they need to get to that level. I also think there's going to be a bit of pressure to make sure Bo Nix has a very successful season too. Like you don't go to New York and put a billboard up in New York City, or go to Dallas and put a billboard up in Dallas and then come out with an offense that's not working, or you come out and you're nationally irrelevant within a few weeks of the season. I think the Ducks, the end goal is big for the Ducks, obviously, Pac-12 championship. I get back to the playoff. They have the talent to do it with this roster, but I think the biggest key for them is just remaining in the conversation. Like that's always been Oregon's thing, is just like be close to the conversation, be reachable. And if they go in and they beat Texas Tech in week 2 and Nix is throwing a bunch of touchdowns and running all over the field, like that's going to be really good for the Ducks, and that's going to be really good for Dan Lanning in the long run too, because not only does it show that you can promote a player like that before the season, but then you can help deliver on what could be a magical season for Nix and the Ducks this year.
And that's another interesting point too that I had in my notes, Bo's billboard. So I'm glad you brought it up. A lot of people are harping on how that's like his Heisman campaign and whatnot, but I love what you said for not only just promoting the guy, but then ultimately being able to follow through and carry through with it. Because you're seeing some people say that it speaks, I think, to like a recruiting pitch for Oregon, and just, and like in the NIL era, and with Nike and the exposure of going to the Big Ten, like I feel like that's like one of Oregon's first like big recruiting pitches on this new stage. Like, come to Oregon and you're going to be a national icon in the sport, which is really what Bo Nix has become.
I'd be curious to figure out the timing and planning process of that, because it seems like it went up a little too quick following the Big Ten announcement to be like, man, Oregon made the Big Ten and they went all, like that thing had to have been planned probably months in advance. But I don't think it's a Heisman campaign. Like I think this is Oregon promoting its best and most known player like across the country. I mean, obviously it has Heisman connotations because of the way that Nix has played and kind of his status within the sport. But I think it's just really easy for Oregon to go to recruits and be like, how am I going to help your brand? Like, look at that. Like you can point to a freaking billboard and say like, this is how we promote our players. Like this goes back to what I said earlier about like, this is the professional era of Oregon football. Like I don't think this is going to be the first type of this sort of thing that the Ducks do moving forward. I don't think it's going to be 20 years again, like it was with the Joey Harrington one, where before we go like, oh man, like look at this random money that Oregon spent to help push the brand forward. Like this is all in the Oregon playbook now.
Yeah. And that speaks perfectly, I think, to kind of some of the tidbits that I've gathered, talking to high school coaches down here and talking to players, talking to parents that are going on these Oregon visits, and they're sitting in on these NIL meetings. Not that this is directly NIL, but it has to do with those lines of exposure and everything. And they're all telling me, I've gone to Alabama and Ohio State and all these big schools. Oregon is on another level when it comes to their approach to NIL. And that's why they're probably one of the teams that's most uniquely positioned to flourish in this era of football. It's not being limited as if it ever was really, but maybe in the past, it's not limited to, oh, this is a small city in Western Oregon. It's blowing up, and Oregon's going to be everywhere. It's that national brand taken to another level.
Right. And that's, I feel like Oregon's lost so much continuity just over the last 10 years because of the change of the coaching staff. And, you know, especially in 16, when you lost all of the history of the assistant coaches there, then you go to Taggart and Cristobal and now Lanning. Like it feels like, as we said earlier, you're still kind of searching for the identity on the field. I love that Oregon still is kind of embracing its non-football identity of like, we're the creative school. We're the ones that are partnered with Nike. Like the fact that you do hear positive things about Oregon in the NIL space too, and in the way that they're able to be creative around that. Like, I think that's where this school really needs to lean into, is just, like we're the uniform school. Like we're the ones that try to do things cool. We try to do things out of the box. We try to do things differently. And while some of the parts of the way we operate may have had to streamline towards how other top tier programs are doing them in terms of, like we said, talent acquisition and all that, like the way you can stand out is still the same way that Oregon stood out in the past. And that's just by being different and being noisy, like putting exclamation points behind things, putting up billboards, you know?
Yeah. It's like, they're really just embracing that aspect of it. Like, you know, people will talk about a million uniform combinations, but no national championships. Okay. Oregon's working to change that, but like, they're going to lean into every bit of that they can, because all these other schools have Nike on their jerseys on Saturdays, but we're talking about Nike University. There's no one that has it better than Oregon in that regard, which is so pivotal and important with where the game's at and where it's headed right now.
And that is one thing that I like about Lanning. You know, like us reporters, again, will complain about how he doesn't tell us much, but he is a coach that has embraced what Oregon is. Like, you know, Cristobal was a really good coach for Oregon. I think people kind of think poorly on it out of spite or whatever, just because he left. But the one thing that I didn't care about Cristobal is like, he was so buttoned up in terms of everything. Like he didn't like headlines that like he didn't approve. He didn't like being flashy. He didn't like, it just seems like a lot of like what Oregon wanted to be, he was contrarian to. Like I even remember, you know, every year you see celebrities getting like their Oregon shoes. Like it's like you see an Instagram post, it's like Kevin Durant unboxing like his Oregon Jordans. And like I really wanted to write a story just about like, how do they go about doing that, or like selecting the celebrities to do this? Like I think this is all just a cool part of Oregon branding, and just Cristobal wanted no part of it. It was just, you know, we don't want to make headlines with this. It's just different, because like, while again, Lanning's pretty buttoned up, I think he very much knows the power of what the Oregon brand can be, and how to really lean into it too.
And that's another area where I feel like he's picked up where Cristobal left off, but also taken it to a new level. And I was even thinking about this before last season, with Lanning, you know, just embracing Eugene and being embraced by the community. It felt like he was taking all of those necessary steps to do everything he could to win without being able to play a game. And I think that you're going to see that trickle down with some of his new hires. I mean, just thinking this offseason, I was listening to Will Stein this morning talking about, you know, the backup quarterbacks and just the traits of a successful offense. And I'm loving what I'm hearing. I love the Leak Terry hire for the offensive line. You know, love listening to him talk, and he's getting me fired up, but he hasn't really coached in a game yet. So it really feels like Dan's doing all the right things right now, and taking those steps to be a successful coach. And then I think, to your point, getting back to the Pac-12 title game, that's I think kind of where you have to start the conversation for next year.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I hate like the yearly discussion of like, do you think he's going to stay in Eugene, or do you think he likes it here, or this or that? But you know, it's interesting with him, because he's at quite the intersection of his career, where if the Ducks have the season that they want to have this year, like he's going to be one of the most popular coaches in the country. That being said, there've just been a lot of quiet things that he's done that just show me that he's a little bit more earnest in saying that, in their embrace of the community, than maybe prior coaching staffs. Like I've even talked to some other coaches that from around here, and it's just, you know, what do you think of Lanning? well, I heard he fishes a lot and doesn't post about it. Like, he's like, I like that. Like, it's such a stupid small thing, but like, how many times did you see Mario Cristobal like out on the river trying to embrace a part of like what makes the Northwest special? Not all that often. Like, it seemed that Cristobal always kept the community at arm's length. He might have been a little warmer to us reporters, but it always just kind of felt like he was putting a spin on something. And I don't know, Lanning feels comfortable within this community. I know he's got young kids that go to school here. And if they can kind of start building something, like, I also think he's a very smart guy. Like, he knows kind of how college football works. And if he were to stay here and put together like a 10-year run of being really, really good, like, he'd become an Oregon legend. And I think that's a pretty smart play if you want that life.
Yeah. And maybe I don't know. I don't want to make too much of the one presser over the weekend, but we kind of have seen a little bit of a pattern with just trying to hold things close to the chest. But to your point about, fishing on the river and leaning into what makes Eugene's and the Northwest special, you have that. And then you have a buttoned up coach at these press conferences. And then I just thought of another example of how he's completely different from Cristobal. I remember covering the early signing period last year while I was on vacation in Europe. It was like, 1 or 2 a.m., whatever it was. And they had just flipped Dalen Austin. They got Mateo. They flipped Jalen, like, just unreal tear. And then what does Dan do? He posts a little video of himself smoking a cigar. Like, what an absolute savage.
Yeah.
And I absolutely love that. Like, you just got to lean into it, lean into your youth, lean into that swag. But then, kind of just be that guy on game day. And that's kind of what we're seeing.
Yeah, it's again, as a reporter, it's frustrating because you just wish that you could have like a little bit of that personality to put into your stories or just even like interactions. But again, like, I'm not going to be the guy who like sits here and argues and says the coach is not giving me enough, because I think we have to be creative in the ways we go about things. And I think I remember the quote last year, because Lanning did this last season too. And he didn't ever put out a depth chart. Like, technically it was still Bo Nix versus Ty Thompson going into week 1. And like, I think Lanning just said, like, if I thought it was an advantage, I would give you guys more, but I don't think it's an advantage. That. And I just like, that's the way he thinks. And I'm fortunate to not have a job where my job doesn't mean I have to be there and ask him like the daily questions of that people need to fill out their daily stories. But, in the future, in years, year 8, year 9, year 10 of this dynasty that he's building, just be a little bit more relaxed, like a little, like I would imagine they have such little regard for my football acumen that why do you think it would be an issue if I'm writing about it? Like, I don't think Lincoln Riley's like reading the I-5 corridor to figure out like what Oregon's doing this week, but maybe he is.
We're talking with Tyson Alger of the I-5 corridor, a little bit of Oregon football chat for you on a Tuesday morning to hold you over until we get to the start of the season. Let's get to some of these questions in the comments, Tyson. If you guys have some more, definitely throw them our way. This one's from LFBP Fishing, who's a frequent viewer. And Tyson, I thought this would be a good one because you were just out that way. Give us a score prediction for the Portland State game. What do you want to see from the defense, from the offense?
Score prediction for the Portland State game. I'm going to say Oregon's going to put up like a 70 spot. Like, the offense is going to hum. Like, that's kind of like what you would expect to see like a Heisman contending quarterback do. Portland State's offense isn't bad. They have like a 3rd-year quarterback in Dante Chaudhry who can really move. He's lengthy. I would just like Oregon's going to win this game by a lot of points, but I just want to see, especially their front 7, just be able to kind of contain that guy and just shut down the run. That's the other thing Portland State has, is they have 3 or 4 running backs that they're pretty proud of. And I've seen practice a few times and like, they can move like they're like, this isn't a team that's not going to be able to move the ball at all against the Ducks, but I would like Oregon to just create a lot of pressure. I don't want them to I don't want to see them get beat over top. So we're going to go like 70 to 16 with 3 field goals. Is that how the math works? This is why I went into writing, but
yeah, I think I was going to go right around that area, like 70 to 14 or 70 to 17, maybe. And as far as just my answers to the defense and the offense, I definitely want to see some pressure. I think it'd be a pretty concerning sign if we didn't see some good pressure from this Oregon front against a team the caliber of Portland State. And also just doing the little things right. You know, not a lot of missed tackles, finishing
Penalties.
plays. I think there's two steps to getting pressure. You have to get the pressure, but then you have to bring the quarterback down as well. So that's what I want to see from the defense. And then the offense, just obviously you want to see Bo settle in well. I want to see some good cohesion and chemistry from that offensive line. That might be able to go 8 deep, according to Will Stein, was kind of one of the quotes that I ran with this morning. And see a lot of young guys or just some of these new pieces get involved, like Trayshawn Holden, Gary Bryant, Tez. Just distribute the ball so you can kind of have a good foundation to spring you into week 2 in Lubbock.
Actually, do you know what I would like to see for the offense? I would like to see Bo have like 4 touchdowns by the half, get him the heck out of there. And then I'd like to see Ty Thompson have a nice quarter of football. Like I think that kid just needs a little bit of positive reinforcement between the lines. Like, I mean, like you talk to guys and he's still a talented practice player, but you always kind of just see those guys who don't get a lot of reps and then they kind of get in there and their eyes get a little wide. So it'd be nice to get Bo out of there healthy and get the backups some reps.
Yeah, could not agree more. I mean, especially after seeing the Washington game unfold how it did, I think a lot of fans were probably a little bit too quick to be critical of Ty because, I mean, you could not ask
that was
for
a tough situation,
a tougher spot to come into. But also, I was a little bit intrigued by the staff's decision to essentially take the ball out of his hands, and because I don't think they passed it while he was called a pass play while he was in. And, you know, he took over at a really good spot where they were about to score. That was like a death march drive, but that's what you have to get your backup to. You have to get to that point. Like I think Lanning said himself, a guy that can take care of the ball and win us games. And that's just not where Oregon's been at.
Yeah.
All right. We got another one here from John Adams talking a little bit of defense. Do we have too many new faces on defense with a complicated defense? What do we think?
I want to be on team chemistry. Like I like the feeling of continuity and guys that are playing off each other and know how things work, know the book and everything. I also like competition, and I like competition a lot, especially when you have the talent level that the Ducks have brought in there. And especially if you go in at what they have at linebacker and secondary, like there are a lot of dudes competing for positions. So I do think that if you are working with a complicated defense, you obviously will run into some issues if you got 4 new starters out there just on the back end. But I think Oregon's coaches have a pretty good handle on what they're doing and what the caliber of athlete that they have, what they can take in during a fall install.
Yeah, and that's along the lines that I was thinking too. This isn't a complicated defense where you're relying on a bunch of true freshmen that you're throwing out into the fire like in 2016 or 2017. Like I'm thinking back to the early days of Thomas Graham and Gianluca Lenore.
Yeah,
they weren't. This is an example of where Oregon's changed as a program. They weren't playing because, oh man, they're just head and shoulders above the rest. Like there's some dudes. It was
it was breaking case of emergency. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's not where Oregon's at anymore. And part of that is because of the roster development and then also talent acquisition. They went into the portal and got some really experienced guys that they feel know football. And then more importantly, that fit their defense. So it's not like they're getting thrown into something and they're like, oh, well, why am I here? This isn't what I was expecting, or this isn't kind of the defense that fits my strengths. Like you go out and get a guy like Jordan Birch, and you go out and get a guy like Evan Williams, Justin Jacobs, and you're seeing those guys that are going to fit what this defense needs.
And that's another thing too, is like if you talk to Evan Williams, like Bennett's been in his ear a ton just about how this thing works. Like I think, again, it's a lot of new faces, but it's a lot of faces that have played a lot of football and or have some connections to the team that might help them get ahead.
Yeah, and I think that's obviously going to be a big role in terms of what they're going to be able to ultimately accomplish this year. It makes me think about how Oregon's brotherhood connection is like, I don't even know what stat you would be able to look at for this, Tyson, but like when there's a brother that plays at Oregon, and then they have a brother that can also play at that level. You have the Sewell brothers, you have the Dye brothers,
now
the Williams brothers. it just goes on and on. It feels like, and the Laulu brothers are there
Nailed
now.
it.
Like,
Yep.
it's crazy.
Yeah, I haven't been able to find that stat tab on PFF.
I need
Just
it.
like the brothers power stat like that. Yeah.
Yeah, we definitely need it. We're getting some other questions in here about recruiting, but I know that's not really your wheelhouse, so we can try to keep it a little bit more team focused. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that kind of comes to mind as far as what we can kind of get into here. We only have a couple minutes left, but maybe I'll just toss it to you. What kind of has your attention, or what are you interested in with this team? A couple weeks away now, less than 2 weeks.
Man, that's a good question. I think on an individual basis, I want to see how much they ride Bucky Irving. Like I loved watching that kid run the football last year. And it was one of the rare times where I saw something that I liked, and then I talked to a coach who reconfirmed it. I had a long interview with former Oregon running backs coach Gary Campbell last year, and was talking to him about Bucky. And I was like, hey, like I don't want to like sound out of turn here, but like some people are saying that like a little bit of the wiggle reminds them of LaMichael James. And Gary was like, oh, most definitely. Like they should be running that guy a lot more. So the tough thing for the Ducks is they have some pretty talented running backs behind them. Noah Whittington, the other guys that they've brought in too. So I'm just kind of curious to see, like, are we going to be having a guy who flirts with like a 1,500-yard season this year, or is it going to be far more distributed, especially with how much that Nick says he wants to run the ball here? That was kind of part of why he put on, I think, 4 or 5 pounds, and he said he focused it in his lower half just because he wants to be able to survive and thrive during a whole season where he's able to use his legs. But then on just like a macro, does Dan Lanning beat his rivals this year? Like I think I think it'd be a tough look to finish out the Pac-12 run with losses against Oregon State and Washington and USC. The Ducks were really good last year, and at times I think people were like, this is the coach, like this is the guy. But you're going to at least have to, I think you got to win two of those 3 games this season to really have people feeling pretty good about things moving forward.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, the Bucky Irving comment was definitely one that I'm super excited about. I mean, he went over 1,000 yards last year, but you kind of wonder what's the ceiling on his production if they're going to continue functioning in this 1A, 1B. Maybe we even see 1C with Jordan James. He's a back that's been generating a whole lot of buzz this offseason. But Tyson, it was awesome having you on here, man. Would love to have you back sometime. But before we get you out of here, where can people find more of you and your work in this space?
Yeah. If you can find all my work at i-5corridor.com. We run about like 1 or 2 free stories a week, but most of the stuff is behind the paywall. Being an independent journalist out there, it's kind of tough to make a living sometimes. So I appreciate anybody who considers that. But if not, just follow me on Twitter at Tyson Alger. And I really appreciate you having me on, man. Like I've been so impressed with, especially the way you've built kind of your online or your video following here. Like I've kind of tried to wade the toes into YouTube, and I just can't be consistent enough. And I mumble way too much to do this as much as you do. So much appreciation for giving me the signal boost and a little bit of time on your platform, dude.
Oh my God, no! It's great to have you on. I'm always looking to chat with other journalists, especially about the Ducks, and appreciate the kind words. I think I'm gonna stay on a little bit more and get some of these mailbags answered. But guys, make sure you tap in with Tyson on all of his platforms, and I can definitely say that he is one of those writers who's worth a subscription just with the level of his work. So it's here on YouTube, the I-5 Corridor, if you're seeing it. But yeah, man, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to talk some Ducks with me. Definitely got to have you back.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And hey, enjoy the season.
All right. Appreciate it, Tyson. Take care, man.
Yeah, later.
See ya. All right. So we're gonna go ahead and switch into a little bit of mailbag for those of you guys that are still here. Really want to thank Tyson for stopping by. Check him out if you guys haven't already, because he is awesome and does some great work. So with that being said, let's hop into some mailbags. Had some of these starred, and I'll get to ones that I can. Not sure how long I'm going to go, but definitely wanted to show you guys some love since you're popping off in the comments here and asking questions. Up the Sco asks, when do you guys think we get new commits? Platt in particular. Braden Platt, 2024 four-star linebacker out of the state of Washington, out in Yelm. If you guys have been rocking with me for a while, you'll remember my good buddy Dylan Rubenking, a.k.a. Rube. He was one of my writers on Ducks Digest and came on the pod every now and then. He's from Yelm. He's living out in Yelm, doing his thing, crushing it. Just got a new job. But it sounded like Oregon's in a really good spot with Braden Platt. I put my prediction in for Oregon to land Platt back in July. Still feeling really confident about that pick as things stand right now. He's supposed to announce his college commitment on September 4th, I believe it is. And that one is down to Oregon and Oklahoma. So definitely some talented schools in the running there, some big name schools, but loving Oregon's position for Braden Platt. I don't think that one's a lock necessarily. Oklahoma is one of those schools that you never know. They could shake things up. They have a good linebacker tradition, and we saw the craziness that happened with Peyton Bowen last year, but loving where Oregon stands for Braden Platt, and I'm keeping my prediction there on him for Oregon. See Me on the Big Screen is a frequent viewer. Thanks for coming back to the show. Glad to have you. See Me on the Big Screen asks, at what point in recruiting will we see a benefit from joining the Big Ten 2024, 2025 class? Well, I think the easiest way to put this one is you're already seeing it. I'm looking back and thinking about my interview with Dakota Fields, one of Oregon's newest commits in the 2024 class. I think he is the newest commit in the 2024 class who flipped from USC, and he's a SoCal guy. He's from Gardena, California, plays for Sarah, where the Ducks found Roderick Pleasant a year ago in the 23 class, speedy corner. But I think you're already seeing it. You're already seeing Oregon being able to go into these homes and sell that Big Ten move. It's only going to help their exposure. Tyson and I were talking about it a little bit when we still had him on the show, just about how it's helping them stay in that conversation, stay in that mix of big-time football programs in 2023 and beyond. There's that exposure from an on-field standpoint, whether you're looking at the network deal. It's going to be much easier now, you would think, to watch Oregon games. They're going to be playing against really high-profile opponents in the Big Ten starting in 2024. So I think you're already seeing it. And then it's also bleeding over into the 2025 class. You have some really good pieces in the fold there. Even since the Big Ten move happened, you have Achilles Smith Jr., quarterback out of San Diego Lincoln, son of Oregon legend Achilles Smith. So he's following in his dad's footsteps. And you saw Oregon flip a 2025 wide receiver and Adrian Wilson from the state of Texas away from the in-state TCU Horned Frogs, who just went to the national title against Georgia. So they're certainly a program that has some juice, but Oregon's already doing it. They're already contending with, some of these massive recruiting powers, and you're only going to see that continue to ramp up as we move forward here in the future. And then they have a couple commitments from the state of Florida, and Dallas Wilson, 6'3" wide receiver from the Tampa area. And, some of the people I'm talking to think that he's going to end up being a 5-star when all is said and done. He's already one of the top wideouts in the country. So they are off and running and as far as recruiting, and the Big Ten move is already paying dividends. So I think that is absolutely huge. Andrew with a question. Andrew asks, if we're going to be tough on Ty for microscopic playing time, that's when Tyson and I were talking about the UW game, should we freak out that MVB got shut out against Buford? We're talking about Michael Van Buren, 2024 Oregon quarterback commit out of St. Francis Academy in Baltimore, Maryland. They opened their season with an 18-0 loss to the Buford Wolves, which is a powerhouse program in Georgia, led by Georgia quarterback commit Dylan Raiola. So I don't think that you should freak out about getting shut out against Buford. If you're an Oregon fan watching the play of the commits, because it's Georgia. Like that's one of the best states in the entire country, littered and loaded with elite talent. Whether you're looking at Dylan Raiola at the quarterback spot, whether you're looking at KJ Bolden, who's going to Florida State as one of the most dynamic athletes in the country, DB wide receiver. And it's I don't think you need to freak out about it, is what I'm saying. But I am excited because Michael Van Buren and the St. Francis Panthers are coming out west in just a couple weeks to play the St. John Bosco Braves, defending national champions. I was just at St. John Bosco yesterday on Monday, got to chop it up with some of their top commits, some of their top players rather. So you can go see those videos on my Twitter at mtorresports or on my Instagram at mtorresports. So a lot of great guys over there and just loaded as ever. But case in point with this question, no need to freak out about Michael Van Buren getting shut out against Buford. John Cena with a question. Always funny to see some of these names. Asks, do you think 2025 class could be our best the way we are starting? Maybe used the wrong R there, but I was a little confused. Yeah, it could be the best ever. I think a lot of people thought that the 2024 class could be the best ever for Oregon. And honestly, it still could be. We are only in August, folks. I know a lot of big targets have already announced their commitments. Some of those didn't go Oregon's way. You're looking at Elijah Rushing, Williams Winery, Colin Simmons. Granted, some of those guys cut Oregon out before making their decisions, but those were top targets that the Ducks were in on. Nate Frazier is another one to Georgia. That was a top guy that they were going after. So I think that the 2024 class could make up some pretty nice ground and could be one that catches a lot of people's attention because we're only in August. We got just under 4 months to go until National Signing Day, until that pen meets paper. And I wouldn't be surprised if Oregon made things interesting November, December, come around that time. I think they might be kind of waiting in the wings. Not that you want to wait to turn it up, but basically winning some of these recruiting battles in August, winning some of these recruiting battles in the summer doesn't mean a whole lot. I know a lot of people, sometimes I'll see USC fans or Washington fans just talk about how it doesn't matter that Oregon's doing well on recruiting some of these guys in the summer. It's good, but it's also, you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt to a degree because it's one thing to get those guys and it's an entirely different thing to hang on to them. That was a key piece of Dakota Fields' recruitment to USC. It was great that he was a USC commit if you're looking at it from through the Trojans lens, but what are you doing to make sure that he stays committed? What are you doing to make sure that he feels like a priority even as a committed prospect? And that's how Oregon approaches recruiting their commits. They check in with them all the time and they make sure that they're feeling like priorities because you can't just get a commit and then take your foot off the gas because other schools certainly aren't. And we saw that certainly with Dakota Fields. All right, we got another one here. A Facebook comment, a Facebook question, Facebook question comment. Nice to get some interaction over there. Orville Harbor says, D-line is going to be very good. Unsung Casey Rogers is going to have a year. Casey Rogers is easily one of my favorite players on Oregon's offensive line heading into the 2023 season because he's just a guy that is kind of I want to say a little bit of a pest on the D line and in the best way possible because he didn't put up a bunch of crazy stats, but he came to Oregon from Nebraska and was so quick to carve out a role along Tony Tuiotti's defensive line in a group that was pretty loaded, pretty veteran laden. And that's the case again this year. So he's certainly playing on the interior, plays a spot that doesn't get a lot of recognition, doesn't blow up the stat sheet, but I'm super high on Casey Rogers this year. Really think he's a talented guy and is going to play a big part in what the Oregon defense is able to do. And I think that if you have Casey Rogers playing at his best, it's going to help those linebackers succeed and come through, shoot through those gaps. So I think that Casey Rogers is a tremendous player. He's been putting up some big weight in the weight room this offseason. I think that that's been coming up a little bit in the pressers, but I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head. So you'll have to forgive me on that one. Okay, we got another question from John Cena. Do you think Oregon's defense could be the best one in the pack? This is an interesting question because this is a loaded Oregon defense, no doubt about it. Whether you're talking about Jordan Birch coming over from South Carolina, or if you're talking about Evan Williams, Tyshim Johnson, Kyrie Jackson, Nico Reed, Justin Jacob. I'm just rattling off transfers There are so many guys, and those transfers are people that are going to help Oregon bridge that gap, help Dan Lanning and Tosh Lupoi really reach the full potential of this Oregon defense from 2022 to 2023. So I think that should be the expectation. If I'm looking at the Pac-12 heading into this year, I'm absolutely circling Oregon as the school that should have the best defense in the Pac-12. That's not just because of the talent that they have on the roster. It's also because of the coaches that they have. The coaches that they have running the show. Those guys are ones that have a proven track record, and I think that we want to see that jump from year 1 to year 2. I think you saw some flashes in that Utah game last year. That was easily their best performance of the year, and that was kind of what won them the game against the Utes. But USC is another school that has reloaded from the portal. Washington usually has a decent defense. Utah also has a good defense. So we'll continue to monitor some of those schools and see what they're able to do this year. But I think Oregon should absolutely be the school that is in that conversation and probably the most likely, I would say right now, to have the best defense in the Pac-12. But it's a long season, and there's going to be a lot of tough teams. There's going to be a lot of great quarterbacks that you have to go against. And what's ultimately going to determine the best defense in the Pac-12, I know Josh Pate was talking about it too, is who's going to be able to get after that quarterback. We saw Oregon's pass rush was just a travesty last year, to put it lightly. But you also got to generate that pressure and then finish the play. I know that can be pretty frustrating if you see the guys get through, but then the quarterback squeaks away. Going to be tough, but I think that they should absolutely be one of the best defenses, if not the best defense in the Pac this year. Another question from Andrew. Andrew says, one last thing. How long into the season do you think it takes for Dickey to be a starting boundary wide receiver? Not to be rude, but he's clearly better than Hudson, Casper, basically everyone but Franklin. Yeah, wow, this is an interesting one because I see the hype behind Jurion Dickey 100%. You know, I covered him pretty well coming out of high school, coming out of the Bay Area. You know, my home roots, but it really feels like Jurion is taking that next step and kind of hit the ground running. He got injured his senior year of high school, and it looks like he's really worked back to being at 100%. And then Will Stein also had an interesting comment. I think it was Will Stein. It was either him or Dan Lanning, but I'm pretty sure it was Stein. Just about, I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, but it's kind of like, you know, you can be the dude at the high school level, but there's still that learning curve once you get to college. It's not always going to be easy for you just because you were a 5-star guy. And I know that that's not the mentality that Jurion is attacking this with. But this is just another example of the hype that he has going into this season as one of the highest rated wide receivers to ever sign with Oregon. Adidas All-American caliber guy. There were some big schools that got involved late, Texas A&M, Penn State, to name a couple. But to go in to answer this question, I don't know. I mean, I think if I had to guess right now, if we're just talking about him starting, I think that it kind of feels like a little bit of a tall order just because of how loaded that wide receiver room is. Troy Franklin's obviously the talk there. But if you're looking at big bodied guys, you have Trayshawn Holden, Kyler Casper as someone that you think is probably going to be heavily involved there. So I would say I'm going to cautiously throw out mid-season if we're talking about when we might be able to see Dickey start. But Trayshawn Holden's played a lot of football, and he looked good in that spring game. He's got a good chemistry with Bo Nix, it looks like, and I think he's in line for a big year too. So I would think that Trayshawn Holden is probably penciled in as that starting boundary wide receiver, or at least that big body wide receiver in their system. But we'll see if Jurion Dickey can make some noise because he's got the frame, 6'2", 6'3", 215 pounds. Now it's just about putting it together and being able to have the game slow down enough for him to take that step. Let's see. LFBP Fishing says, Bucky gets oiled up like a rustler. Bucky is so slick. Yeah, Bucky Irving is easily one of my favorite players on this Oregon offense heading into next season. The dude's ability to keep the play alive, to get skinny, the wiggle that he has to his game. And the burst that he has is definitely a very unique one. But no, Whittington isn't going to be going away anytime soon in that room. Jordan James, who comes in after burning his red shirt last year, was primarily used as the third down back and the goal line, short yardage back. I think he's a guy who's definitely in place to have a bigger role in 23 for the Ducks. And I know that Carlos Lachlan loves what he's been seeing out of Jordan James based on kind of what we've been hearing from some of the praise he's been giving in those press conferences. So Bucky is definitely the man. John Cena asks, do you think Jaleel Florence could get a starting spot? This is an interesting one because Jaleel Florence played some good football as a true freshman. He enrolled in the spring, kind of in the back half, ahead of his freshman year. I remember he signed, as well as Jaleel Tucker, who is now transferred to San Diego State. But he decided to enroll early. Jaleel Tucker wanted to stick around for his senior year at track. And I think Jaleel Florence could end up getting a starting spot on this Oregon defense in this cornerback room. That is such a densely packed room right now. And I think that what we're going to have to see through these first couple of weeks is who can separate themselves. Because Dante Manning, Trikweze Bridges, they've been at Oregon. They've been playing in this defense, but we still haven't really seen those guys take the next step in their development and prove that, hey, this is a corner who is head and shoulders above the rest of that group. In my mind, that's why you bring in guys like Kyrie Jackson from Alabama, like Nico Reed from Colorado. And that's also why you sign a trio of All-Americans in Dalen Austin, who is someone that Tyshim Johnson singled out as a young guy standing out. Roderick Pleasant, Cole Martin is a guy who I think is certainly going to be in that conversation, but he's playing some nickel, it looks like. So I think the secondary is one huge puzzle right now going into the season. We just don't know. I have no idea what the pecking order looks like. If you're even just looking at it at the two positions, who's the alpha dog in each of those rooms? Has Kyrie Jackson stepped in and shown why he was at Alabama? Has Nico Reed stepped in and shown that he can capture some of that lightning that Christian Gonzalez captured last year in terms of the carryover, playing under Demetrius Martin again? I think that's an interesting thing that you have to look at for sure. And then how much of a jump start did Cole Martin and some of those other guys have? Well, Cole Martin had the jump on Dalen Austin and Roderick Pleasant because he was there as an early enrollee. And then he also had the jump on Solomon Davis and Colin Gill, some other corners that the Ducks signed. So I think that Jaleel Florence, he showed flashes as a true freshman. He's fast. He's long. He checks those boxes in this Dan Lanning defense. So I think he could get a starting spot at some point, but it's such a toss-up right now anywhere in the secondary, in my opinion. Orville Harbor with another question coming over from the Facebook page over at Ducks Digest. Thanks for the question, Orville. What do you think about our linebacker situation this year? Yeah, Oregon's linebacker situation is honestly one that I've gotten more confident about as the offseason has kind of progressed here. At the end of the season, Oregon's linebacker group almost got gutted, really. If you just compare it at the end of the 2022 season to now, Noah Sewell went off to the NFL. Now he's playing for the Chicago Bears. Congrats to him. He's moving on to bigger and better things in the NFL. Jackson LeDuc transferred back home to UNR to play for Ken Wilson. You had Harrison Taggart transfer back home as well to play for the BYU Cougars in his home state of Utah. And Keith Brown hit the portal and ended up transferring to Louisville. So this is a very new, and Justin Flo transferred to Arizona. So this is a very, very new linebacker room. Justin Jacobs comes in from Iowa, and you're looking at him and Jeffrey Bassa, who bulked up like a madman, up to 230 now in the offseason. You're looking at a very likely starting combination of Jeffrey Bassa and Justin Jacobs in that linebacker core. And then Jamal Hill comes down from the secondary, and the quote that I like to refer to for that one to reference is Tosh Lapoy saying that if he had a time machine, he would have done it sooner. He's bulked up and probably looks a little bit more comfortable at that linebacker spot than the secondary. I just don't know, for my 2 cents, I don't know if he was fast enough to really kind of be what the Ducks needed him to be in the secondary. So you try kicking him down, putting some muscle on his frame, and maybe he turns into a solid linebacker for you. And then Devin Jackson is one of the freakiest players on this team. Honestly, a guy who flew under the radar as an All-American in the 22 class, 4-star caliber guy. Now you have a linebacker. He's up to 228 pounds after coming to Oregon at 207, I believe he said. Now you have him squarely in the conversation for the fastest guy on the team. And he's a linebacker. So I'm feeling great. I'm feeling real good about Oregon's linebacker situation. Granted, it's really an unknown. It's definitely a question mark because we just don't know what those guys are going to look like playing together. But then you also have Connor Sowelli, who comes over from Arizona State, and Jerry Mixon, who the Ducks signed in 2023 as their only true linebacker recruit out of high school. He's already at 230. He's super athletic, played some running back, played some edge for Sacred Heart Cathedral out there in San Francisco, California. Maybe I'm a little biased because I'm from the Bay, but I'm really liking it. And this was probably one of the areas I was most questioning of this year. But I'm feeling real good about it. You got the guys there, and I think because Oregon plays a 4-2-5, you'll hopefully be able to get a good rotation and keep those bodies fresh if you need to. Bro knows with a question, how much do you think we're going to see Ty play quarterback in the first 4 games? Yeah, I think you should see a decent amount because you open against Portland State. So like Tyson was saying, hopefully you can get Bo in there, run up the score and get him out of there and get some more game reps for Ty. So I think Portland State obviously looks like your best opportunity to see Ty, in the first 4 games. And then going out to Lubbock, and unless that one's a blowout, which I don't think a lot of people are expecting it to be, I think the Red Raiders led by Tyler Shuck are probably a little bit underrated going into this season. I don't think you're going to see a whole lot of him. But then you come back home to Hawaii to play the Rainbow Warriors, and I think that that's another game that Oregon should win handedly. Should definitely be able to put that one away pretty early. So you're thinking Portland State and now Hawaii are some times that you're going to see some good shots of Ty and see some good sampling about where he has been able to progress. Because Will Stein just said this week that he's taken major strides in his game this offseason. And then you also have Colorado, the Pac-12 opener, Pac-12 home opener, first Pac-12 game for Deion Sanders, Coach Prime, and the Buffs, who are also on their way out of the Pac-12, Pac-4, I should say, going to the Big 12. So I think that Colorado is going to be improved, but they shouldn't be able to hang with Oregon. I think that it's a little bit concerning if Colorado's hanging with Oregon. I don't care about all the guys that they brought in. There's a lot of work to do with that program. I think they're going to be better for sure, but they shouldn't be on Oregon's level, I don't think. So they should be able to put that one away, and then you should see some more of Ty Thompson there possibly. But Austin Novosad has also been challenging him or pushing him, I think is probably the right word that Stein used in reference to his development. So we're going to have to see. But I think you should see a pretty healthy helping of Ty Thompson in the first 4 games for Oregon in 2023. We got Brandon here saying, Max, let's go. We got Cash Out Win saying, everybody like the stream. Yes, please do me a favor and smash that like button for me. And then while you're at it, subscribe to the YouTube channel and hit that bell notification so you don't miss out. But yeah, I think that's gonna wrap it up here for the mailbag section of today's episode of the pod. I'll get it clipped up and get it over on the audio platform. But before I get out of here, if you guys want to find more of me, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at mtorresports. You can find me on YouTube right now at Oregon Football Max Torres, and you can read all of my written content over on ducksdigest.com. But until next time, thank you guys so much for taking some time out of your day. Talk some ball with me, talk some Duck recruiting, and we'll catch you in the next episode of the Ducks Dish Podcast.